Liverpool are doing scary things. Look, they've just announced the signing of Florian Wirtz this evening. We've known for a couple of weeks that that's a signing that will happen to Liverpool, but that doesn't make it any less scary. And some of the big names that they're also linked to at the moment, make that whole transfer window and what they might look like in next season's campaign even more scary. As a Manchester City fan personally, I would be lying if I didn't say I was worried about how they might look and who they might end up with at the end of this transfer window. And as a professional football analyst, I kind of want to dive into this whole ordeal a little bit more systematically and a little bit more objectively, because if I'm being subjective, I am incredibly worried about my team's chances to compete. I always say Manchester City and Guardiola will compete, and I do think that I still have us as winning the league next season given our current investment, but the names touted for Arne Slot's Liverpool next season are crazy. We'll begin by talking about Florian Wirtz, because he's a player who I've been huge on for a number of years as this, just a generally incredible player. On the overlap, we did a good in-depth breakdown about his entire profile and where he might play for Liverpool. I'll touch upon it in this video briefly, but in that video I mentioned that Florian Wirtz was a player who I've had my eye on for a huge amount of time and a number of years for sure. I think the first time I had seen him play was the under-21s Euros for Germany, and I didn't even know who he was at the time, but I remember watching Germany in a one-off game randomly, and he was the standout player across both teams immediately on first watch. I made a note of his name and number, and I've followed his career since then, and I've been nothing but impressed. Obviously, he had that ACL injury as well, which really worried me because I thought we'd lost incredible world-class potential, but he's bounced back brilliantly and reinvented his game slightly, but not lost any of the brilliance that made him such an exciting prospect to begin with. And he's gone to Liverpool, and that really pains me because I have this tweet from, it must be 3 years ago now, I think it was 2022, where I said Florian Wirtz and Phil Foden as double eights, the universe needs it. And I still think the universe needs it, but it's not happening anytime soon, and I don't think it will ever happen, which is frustrating. But Liverpool have got a gem in Florian Wirtz for sure. There's been a lot of talk about where he might fit into the team in general. I want to talk about some of the other players that they're linked to and that they are going to sign before I talk about the system in general. But Florian Wirtz as an individual is somebody who can kind of do a bit of everything. We always talk about creative midfielders and think about their ability to pass the ball, and he's got a wicked pass, whether that's in small spaces, in a David Silva-esque kind of fashion, or whether he can carry the ball in big spaces and play a pass whilst running off of a sprint in a Kevin De Bruyne-like fashion. And the fact that he can attack both big spaces and also small spaces is one of the most impressive things about him as a creative midfielder. Ryan Cherky, who I'm a huge fan of and I think is one of the best players in the world, is certainly somebody who favours running in smaller spaces, but also he's got a good initial burst in the bigger spaces. But I think Florian Wirtz has more running power in general than Ryan Cherky, and that's the main sort of standout difference between them two. Another thing I'll mention actually as to why Florian Wirtz probably suits Liverpool better than anybody else is because of his incredible pressing quality. And Liverpool have been a team who have prided themselves in being very strong presses and very strong out of possession and using the energy that the crowd at Anfield often give them to hunt teams down. And, for players who are incredibly talented in attack, especially creatively, they often don't necessarily put in the hard yards. But Florian Wirtz is somebody who wins the ball high up in the opposition's third. Very frequently, I think he's one of the top players in the world for winning the ball back in the opposition's third. So that's certainly something to look out for. I think is a perfect match generally, to be honest, if we're talking about team, culture, philosophy, and an individual themselves. So as much as it pains me to say that, Florian Wirtz is a brilliant player. It's a steep fee, of course, but you pay a premium for world-class players. And I'm kind of happy actually that we're seeing that sort of money spent on an attacker rather than a central midfielder or a defensive midfielder. The pressure's on for sure, but I think he has more than enough quality if nurtured correctly and if played in the right system to excel, and particularly under Arne Slot, who's brilliant at profiling players, as we've seen in his first season, which is why I think they won the league. They didn't necessarily bring in too many reinforcements, but it was the ability to profile the players that he currently had at his disposal, which allowed him to get the best out, for example, Mo Salah, and end up winning the league. Florian Wirtz aside, which is a hilarious thing to say because he's such a good player. They're linked to so many other players. I've not even mentioned Frimpong, who's who was signed before Florian Wirtz, and the fact that they know each other is always a big positive in helping somebody, get to grips with a new country and get to grips with a new team and that familiarity and that human element. I would be lying if I didn't say that I think Liverpool certainly take those kind of things into consideration in their scouting and in their recruitment. Frimpong's an electric player, and he provides something that Trent Alexander-Arnold can't. Obviously, Trent provides things that Frimpong can't as well in his deep passing, but Frimpong brings back this energy, this overlapping speed that frees up Mo Salah to actually play a little bit more inside. And he's a little bit different from Bradley. Bradley's also a very apt replacement for Trent Alexander-Arnold, in my opinion. But Frimpong's a really exciting player. Not only can he push on, on the overlap, but I think his ability to underlap and attack the edge of the box and chip in with goals as well is really impressive. On our overlap breakdown episode, actually, we did talk about how the overlapping fullbacks might be used by Arne Slot, and obviously they're linked heavily to, and I think they will sign Milos Kerkez from Bournemouth in the Premier League, who's come off of a brilliant season as well. But these two high-flying fullbacks are a throwback to the early days of Robertson and Trent Alexander-Arnold. I think both of those players have kind of lost that athletic edge that made them the best in the world. But because Arne Slot didn't use them in that fashion last season, it'll be really interesting to see how he does use this profile of fullback that he's bringing in. We've seen it in the likes of PSG, for example. We've seen it in the likes of Manchester City as well. The fullbacks in high possession size are the players that get the most chances and the most space against stubborn low set defences. Nuno Mendes and Hakimi were players that were arriving in the box as much as you'd expect a number 10 to probably do so. And that, reaped its rewards in the Champions League final more than any other game. So that sort of trend in meta football tactics is really interesting, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why Liverpool have gone and signed these two incredibly expressive and incredibly athletic fullbacks. I think both of them can attack wide, which frees up your wingers to move inside, so Salah can get close to goal. Wirtz, if he does play on the wing, can again move into that half space in which he's so dangerous, and if either of those two wingers do hold their width, then you've got the ability for your two fullbacks to underlap and attack the box, because they both can do that. And I think the ability for your brilliant players to hold the touchline means that more players of the opposition are drawn towards them, freeing up that space inside for Frimpong and Kerkez to attack the box, which is incredibly frightening, really, when you put all of that together. They've got a plan. Even if it's only theoretical at this point, in my head, that seems so dangerous, and it seems like a system that will be very hard to stop. Obviously, behind them, they'll have some more pragmatic sort of workhorse midfielders. Szoboszlai, I think, will have a large part to play next season, covering for some of those, more attacking phases of play from Liverpool. But that's not to say that the players that they've brought in can't backtrack and back press in an incredible way. Like we've already mentioned, Wirtz, incredibly hardworking in his defensive acumen, and then Frimpong as well, lightning quick, so he can get back into positions when he is out of position when the ball is turned over again. Kerkez again for Bournemouth, who press remarkably high and intensely, can do the same running backwards. So there's a clear philosophy in all of the players that they are targeting. There's also rumours that they are looking to get Guéhi in, which is a captain of another Premier League club. And Kwanzaa is rumoured to be moving to the Bundesliga. And as much as I think Kwanzaa has a lot of potential and is a good signing, if you can replace his minutes and what he does with a Premier League FA Cup winning England international captain in Guéhi, who can also play both sides, left centre-back and right centre-back, I think that's a fairly obvious thing to do. He's a brilliant player. Although he's not the most imposing in the air, he reads the game really intelligently. Everyone calls him Uncle in the England camp, despite his younger age compared to the other players, but that goes to show his sort of personality. And I think you need those sort of leaders, those sort of figureheads throughout the team to kind of keep your own, especially in sort of more intense and more emotionally driven moments throughout a season. So Guéhi would be a brilliant signing as well. I'm trying to think if they're linked to anybody else. I hope they're not, because they're going 4 for 4 if we're talking about names in that regard. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention the biggest rumour of all so far, with Nunez perhaps moving to the Saudi League. I think, Arne Slot's probably had enough with what he's seen from Nunez, and it's probably an experiment that's not worked. I think the acquisition in the first instance was driven by Jurgen Klopp more than anybody else. But if they move him to Saudi, they're looking at number 9, and Look, the name that I've heard is Isak. I genuinely hope they don't get Isak. The other player actually I've heard them linked to is Anthony Gordon, with Diaz possibly moving. I know Barcelona were interested in him earlier on in the window. Both players incredibly every good adjective I can think of. I'm a huge fan of both of them. And if you think about Newcastle and their philosophy, the ability to press high, those high turnovers being a hallmark of Eddie Howe's game, and also I think a core to Liverpool's philosophy. Brilliant in transition, but also good at breaking down blocks, the ability to rotate across all three positions in that front line. Situationally, Anthony Gordon, I've been a huge fan again for years. These are sort of all of my old school favourites from 4 or 5 years ago. I was repping Anthony Gordon when he was in Everton, and now obviously he's an England international footballer, and he's brilliant, but he can cut inside and get goals. He can go outside and play on that flank itself. He's remarkably quick. He's very hardworking. He's got a brilliant mindset. I would encourage everyone to watch that Gary Neville interview with Anthony Gordon, because he talks about things like visualization and his pre-match routine, and all of those things are remarkably impressive from him. I'm a huge fan of him, but if they get either him or Isak, it feels like it's wraps for the league. But Guardiola always has something up his sleeve, and they're investing heavily in their own players, Aït-Nouri, Reinders, Cherki. I know that there's more names that they want to bring in as well. So look, from a completely objective standpoint, the system looks like it works in theory, and it looks like they're signing the best sort of profiles across world football in those positions that they need. They're investing heavily. Steven Gerrard said it's like Liverpool are trying to build the roof while the sun is still shining. I think that's a perfect way to put it. They've never necessarily kind of doubled down and built upon a good core. It feels like a lot of their core sort of elite players, their all-timers, Alisson, Van Dijk and Salah, although they can play for a few more years, are coming towards the more twilight years of their career. And this feels like that next big rebuild in the same way that they did do all those years ago. And my, oh my, they're really investing with big money, and they're picking brilliant players across world football. So it'll be exciting to see how they do line up and how they do play. But I think we've got a general idea given the profile of players that they have targeted so far. I'm really excited from a football analyst point of view to watch them and see how Arne Slot does profile them. But yeah, I hope they don't get any more of their players and their targets. But if they do, it will be a long, long season for anybody and everybody in the league. I'll catch you again tomorrow.